Olivia Donnelly, Theo Fraser-Steele, the director Philip Wilson, who I mentioned. Oh goodness, wait, no. What? Miles Molan,
Yeah.
Phoebe Price, and the one who's coming back is he's the most important man in the room, if you guys don't mind me saying. He's the producer, Ashley Cook, who runs Troupe Theatre Company. So thank you all for joining us. Big round.
You'll be aware there's missing one. It's Freddie. His parents are in tonight, and interesting trivia fact: his father, William Gaminara, who's also an actor, played Jim in the production that Alec McCowan was in at Greenwich Theatre the last time this play was performed, not this adaptation. So he sends his apologies, but family were in. So
now that's very good. Oh, thank you. And now I've got my props. Playtext available at the box office. And that also reminds me of something really important that I wanted to say to everybody on the stage. You guys know this production and this play better than I do, and certainly better than they do. So if you think we're missing something interesting, just steer us in the right direction. Okay, very good. And now let me ask the people on the stage. Who on the stage, besides Philip, had read, before being involved in this production, had read A Single Man, the novella?
yeah.
The job I read it, but I hadn't read it before that.
You read it for the job.
Yeah.
You read it before the job. Before the job.
I read it when after I'd seen the film.
And then that was the second one. How many had seen the film?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay,
No.
that's good. So what's that?
No.
So you were just a newbie all around.
No, yeah. But I haven't watched the film on purpose.
Okay. So I'm going to actually start with Ashley then. Ashley, I introduced you in your absence. Hello, Ashley. Ashley, what was it about A Single Man that made you, as Troupe Theatre, want to adapt and stage it?
Well, I was looking for a classic novel to adapt because we hadn't done a novel before, and I've been paired up with Simon Reade, the playwright, adapter, and we looked through a number of different options, and you do have to think of what is going to bring people in and interest people, and obviously the Tom Ford film had not escaped our attention. So, but I also loved the book, and I had read it before the Tom Ford film, and always loved it, and it hadn't been, it hadn't been produced as a play for a long time. So we alighted on that really, and I just thought it had some amazing universal themes in it, and obviously Isherwood is a very famous writer, and I knew people would be interested in it, so that's why we did it.
That's very good. And I should let you know, you didn't see, but this lovely audience, none of them had been to a Troupe Theatre production before, and I'm telling them how amazing all of your productions are. So we've done lots of these together in the past. We started off doing the ones that I worked with you on, were like very little known revivals of classic plays. J.M. Barrie, The Cardinal. Then you transferred a new play from the US. Then you produced your own new play, which from a living British writer. And now this, your first adaptation. So a great range of material that you're working on. And so through Simon Reade, I believe that then brings us to Philip. Is that right? So Philip, how did you get involved and what attracted you to the material to direct it?
Well, I knew Ashley a little bit as an actor. Ashley's a very fine actor as well as a very fine producer. And Simon Reade and I had worked together previously on two other adaptations by Michael Morpurgo, Toro and Twist of Gold. So I don't know, maybe I was on a list, but there seemed to be a sort of synergy there, so they contacted me. And this was in sort of early 2020, and then obviously things happened.
Yes.
So we spent a lot of time on Zoom talking in the sort of abstract about this. But I'd read the book. It was very interesting. I'd read the book when interesting to me. I'd read the book when I was Kenny's age, and now I'm more George's age, and it was interesting kind of returning to it. And in the interim, my father had died of a heart attack at the age roughly the same as George, and my brother had been killed in a car accident. So, I mean, one directs things that sort of touch you, and I've directed lots of plays that haven't kind of had quite such a personal resonance, but this one did particularly. which made it quite interesting tonight when my uncle, i.e. my father's brother, came to see the show. So I think as well as a gay man, I think it's kind of extraordinary as a story. I haven't lost a lover, but the idea, I think, you know, in the past 2 years as well, most of us have lost someone. So I think this story, as Ashley says, has kind of themes. It's obviously centrally about a gay man's sense of loss and potentially kind of unblocking that loss, and then the heart gives up, which is a kind of particular cruel kind of aspect of the piece. But also just, yes, and friends and feeling like an outsider, who we're with, who defines what an outsider is, who puts people in groups, who puts people out of groups. And it was a chance to work with these lovely people, so I signed up quickly.
Indeed. So I'm going to ask the next question first to Philip, but then all of you, I'd like to hear if you have a perspective. So this was a novella. It's a film that many of them have seen. What do you think bringing it to the stage, how does that change the story?
More of Isherwood, basically. I mean, it's a beautiful film, but has almost no words in it, as films often don't, and it's exquisite, and there's not much Isherwood that survives. So, you know, it's an award-winning, wonderful film, amazing performances, but for me, it's about Isherwood's language, and so Simon's adaptation was very much about a celebration, and Isherwood himself was influenced, as you probably have guessed, by Mrs. Dalloway, another Life in a Day story, and he described that as the most extraordinary prose poem, which was a phrase that we used in rehearsals. I mean, you know, some people have come along and found it a bit too literary, but I think, you know, there's a little, as you probably spotted, there's a little Undermilk Wood joke as well in the book, which Theo picks up on. So, you know, it's a celebration of language as well of character. So, and I love the film. I hate the suicide plot. I think that's, I mean, you know, suicide is obviously a tragedy, but I think the book, as I've said, holds a greater tragedy, which is that just at the point that George moves on, the body gives up. So. I
wonder if he dies with a broken heart.
No, well, maybe that's
an
option.
Well, I think that there are studies that show that after the loss of a loved one, that it does genuinely affect your heart.
Certainly his heart is broken, but I think whatever happens or doesn't happen with Kenny, in some ways, you know, those last speeches that Theo delivers so beautifully are about, I think, about moving on and finding, it's not like zippity-doo-dah, but there's some sense of bereavement is a kind of ossification. He's sort of become a fossil. He describes himself as one at the beginning, and he begins to move on. But as Phoebe Paramedic says, you know, maybe at that point, you know, maybe at the point where he met Jim is also where the clock starts ticking. You know, the body can be cruel. Indeed. So maybe, I mean, obviously we respect all opinions. I personally think he's actually moving on. But it's also quite important. The clock's set at a very important time. 4 o'clock is about the time when most people die in the night. So.
Ooh, wow, that's. We might come back to that.
That's why we have a jolly place.
I want Theo to come in on that particularly, but before that, let me show you some props. The play text, as I mentioned, is available by Simon Reade. Wonderful, and also Simon has written in the programme a lovely piece that touches on some of the things that Philip has just said about the theatricality of the language and how that lends itself to how he approached the adaptation. Theo, what do you think is going on with George in terms of, is he about to start a new life, or is he...
I think it's exactly as Philip said. I think he is. He's suddenly gone, you know, there's a sort of, you know, a glimmer of hope, and he's like, right, I'm going to do it. It's like he's turned a corner in his grief, and then of course it all goes wrong.
Yeah. And I do have to say, because so many of us in the room have seen the film, except you, but so you're probably the worst person to answer this, but you two are following in the footsteps of these characters of Colin Firth and Julianne Moore. Does that affect you at all when you're like approaching a character, knowing that people have in their mind a vision of a famous actor having done it before you?
You know, it's not very helpful to think like that, because what can we do about it? But before the audition, I started to watch the movie and stopped, because she's perfect. I mean, she's absolutely incredible, and she's not what's written in the book. And we're doing an adaptation of the book. I mean, in the book, Charlie has an arthritic limp. I mean, you know, so we're not quite doing that either. But she's a very different person, and so what would be the point?
Yeah.
And I would want to do it the way she does it. She does it so beautifully, but it's not helpful.
Well, you do it beautifully as well and differently. And what do you think?
I wanted to play him. I just, when I read it, I mean, who wouldn't want to do that role? I mean, it's just the most fantastic role, and it's like jumping out of a plane at the beginning and then sort of landing, you know, an hour and a half later. It's
with a hug at the end.
God, for that, yeah. But it's just, you know, it's beautiful. The words are beautiful, and it's a
even the orchestra is beautiful.
yeah. And it's a, you know, wonderful ensemble cast, and it's like, I mean, you know, who wouldn't want to do that?
It is fantastic. And I was just going to say also, the dinner scene is such a pivotal scene, and the rapport that the two of you create in that scene. You know, do you, as actors, do you explore kind of the backstories of these characters and why they have this
A bit.
deep
Can I
relationship?
just talk about the rehearsal when they got drunk on water? I thought stage management spiked their drinks. There was this hysterical giggling going on. I didn't quite know what was going on. And it was purely water.
One afternoon on water.
I think it's so beautifully written that we didn't have to do too much of that. Like, we did talk about it, obviously, and there's a reason why they're both not home, and they're both searching for whatever home means to them, and so there's a magnetism between them, and we had to explore like how they get on and how they don't get on as well. But I think it was very easy. It was very easy, very quickly, and I think it's because the scene. And Philip allowed us to be so free with this as well until, you know, we found a shape.
I mean, there's such affection and love between the two, but then there's this one really casually callous line that she says to him that really like just took my breath away. Like, well, of course you never had a family, or words to that effect. You think,
But he's unkind to her as well. It's like that right at that moment when he says, "Yeah, I made you into a sob story for a skirt." That's so unkind, so cruel. And and we only sort of got to that stage, you know, relatively late. I think have we even done a preview or something? And we said it's got to be uglier, it's got to be nastier, it's got to get, you know, to that point. It's not clean, it's messy, and they're messy people, and they're a mess, you know, and that's why they sort of cling on to each other. And
we talked about drunkenness and what that was, and we decided obviously we wouldn't get to sort of slur. I mean, they're habitual drinkers, so they wouldn't slur until they were really out of it. But it becomes about thought length and mood swings, and also, you know, kind of how they can actually become sort of uncensored, really. So they are like that. I mean, actually, the hardest unit was the first bit, the kind of hello bit was really difficult, because it was trying to work out how these evenings began, because we sort of said it was a bit Groundhog Day, that they had many meals like that, and obviously Theo and Olivia didn't know each other very well. They had a huge concrete table to kind of negotiate. So it was about
it's like with the drinks cabinet. You know, he goes there once a week for supper. So it's like he knows where the drinks go. He knows what the things is. He knows what she drinks. It's like, and I'd like a vodka. And I know what you want. You know.
It does not bore. And Jim used to come as well to these meals.
Yes.
And so that he's very absolutely
missing third person.
So the absent Jim, and Kenny, let me turn to Miles for a moment, that hug that Theo mentioned is beautiful, and I noticed that you continue in the hug into the curtain call. Is that just because you're supporting each other? So that's not an every night thing.
No, it's I just think it's a lovely image, and it's nice to sustain it for a little bit longer.
Well, I was hoping it might be because he was saying, "Well done on your professional debut."
Thank you.
Can you believe that?
He graduated on Friday and started with us on Tuesday.
I mean, that's incredible. How are you feeling about your first professional production? Have you enjoyed it so far?
Yeah, I've loved it. I think I feel very lucky, because to be in such an amazing cast and to feel very looked after. I think Ashley and Philip from the first auditions were very supportive. It was my first in-person audition I'd done. It was my first, I was very new to it, and they were really open and supportive. And then obviously walking into a room with very professional people was quite an experience. And then the mask fell, and I felt very at home. It's acting with Theo's been a dream. Every performance is different. It feels different, and I think it was weird when the park said that they were going to do this show. I went to book tickets because I wanted to come see it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is very weird.
Who did you give your tickets to?
No, I've kept them for myself. So then when I was able to be part of it, it was very felt like a beautiful kind of full circle moment, because I'd read the book before I'd seen the film, and I was like 17, 18 and loved the book, and then never thought I'd get a chance to play Kenny. And
first out of the gates. That's incredible. Okay, Phoebe, I'm not overlooking you. You and Freddie, and a bit of Miles, but mainly you and Freddie, have in some ways the most difficult roles of the evening. Especially, you're playing multiple characters, you are coming in and off the stage, moving the furniture about, and some rapid changes. How do you pace yourself during the performance?
I
Don't have time.
No, you don't have time to think about it.
Yeah, I said this the other day, that I think actually quite helpfully there's not too much time to think, so there's not too much time to worry, and you just kind of get on the plane and just get on and keep going until you can get off, and that's it. But that's part of the joy of it. That's what I'm really enjoying, that there's just, doesn't stop.
Very good, very good.
And I must admit, I was quite strong with the production team that we had to have as much as possible in the rehearsal room, so that we could kind of practice, because this is not the sort of thing you can pick up in a tech. So we had items to move, and we talked about journeys, and we'd practiced the costume change, because we only had about 8 hours to tech this show, which is not very much. So we kind of had to be very, very organised. So in order that, because it's sort of hideous, and it could just be a car crash of kind of not quite making a costume change, arriving on stage stressed, whereas, they come on. I mean, but Freddie and Phoebe wear tennis clothes for about 30 seconds, and then they're off, and then they come back on in a wheelchair, and then it's like, it's just endless moving. So.
It is indeed. And any mishaps so far? It's only been a week or so. Not at all. Okay, in the back we have the first audience question. Sorry to take so long to come to you.
I was curious to know if during the rehearsal period, if any of the writing changed or the balance between scenes changed. Was there discussion with Simon and anybody else that changed things as you went along a little bit?
A little bit. To be honest, everything had to go past the estate, which is Don, as in Isherwood's lover, his Jim, who is still alive, and we had to. So there had been previous drafts, and in fact during lockdown we did do a reading of an earlier draft, and we did make some changes then. We made some cuts and some shifts around, and Ruskin didn't get his little moment in the sun, because we had a little bit of Ruskin and that sort of thing. So things kind of changed. I think in terms of rehearsals, there were a couple of sentences that I kept listening to and thinking, I understand it on the page, but I can't hear it. You know what I mean? So, and also, if you look at the script, Jim appears more than he does in the original, in the finished production, and that was Simon's suggestion, because once you meet Kenny, it becomes more complicated about the kind of doubling. But also we split Jim, because we had kind of Jim Ghost, who's in his best officer and a gentleman naval uniform, but he can't really. I realised very quickly, he couldn't exist in the house. So there's Jim Flashback. So there's Jim Ghost and there's Jim Flashback. So we cut most of them, but I also thought if you've all gone out in the interval and had a gin tonic or whatever, we sort of needed to meet him again. So he comes back at the beginning of the second half, but essentially he kind of bookends the show. So I've been dying to ask Freddie about his dad, because his dad played Jim, but it was a long time ago. He did say he had lines, so clearly I think it was a very different show. But so not massively changed now.
Well, I can't. I'm not going to embarrass him by asking the question, but I couldn't decide which was Miles's most attractive moment. Was it in that gorgeous naval uniform, or when he was jumping in the sea? I'm not sure.
Well, I think when having to stage that scene was a leap of faith, because doing it without an audience is one thing, and trusting that it will work, and then doing it with an audience and being like, are they laughing? Are they looking at all your ugly bits and all like every angle, and it's just like
it's the look on Theo's face when you're talking about it.
No one's laughing.
That is really beautifully done, and so I just want to give a shout out to the movement director, Natasha Harrison.
Oh.
And also, I mean, the creative team, the lighting does such a lot of work from Peter Harrison's. It's a great team. Any more shout outs?
Well, Beth, the sound designer and composer. I mean, there are so many, and again, and Theo, I hope you won't mind me saying this. Sound is very throwing for an actor. It's like if you're trying to do something and the television's on loud. It's hard to think, and similarly for an actor when you're trying to do someone else's words. So I know that, and I respect that. And we had, I think it's something like 140 sound cues. So we introduced them very early, and every time it would be very throwing. And then it becomes, sound, and for Phoebe and Freddie, kind of Benny on the drums, Benny on the bins. Those things, there's so much that's going on. And Alice, another shout out to Alice and Helen, who's our stage managers, are amazing, because they're, sometimes she's actually cueing with her toes, because it's so much going on. So it's quite a big ask of everyone, but yeah.
And coming back to, you're mentioning Don, Isherwood's partner. I read in Simon's script that he also had recommended the music used in the piece. Is that right?
Yes, he had.
Oh, okay.
We don't use it. Sorry, Don.
Sorry, Don.
No, it was rather beautiful because he shared pieces that Isherwood loved, which was a beautiful thing. And most of those are theatre music is a very particular thing. You have a lot of cultural assumptions. There's a piece of Ireland music which he recommended, which we do use, and it's called A Summer Evening. So if you know that, you know what's going on behind the Cotswold scene. But if you don't know that, it's a nice piece of music. But a lot of the other ones, such as Fanfare for a Common Man, would have been just so huge that it wouldn't have worked with a human voice, I think.
So I think what's interesting about that, Terry, and why we've left them in the playtext, is that that's come from John Bacadie. So that is a piece of Isherwood's past, and that's what they listened to together. And to leave them in the playtext, I think, is a nice piece of history, because we wouldn't have known that otherwise. Yeah. We chose to leave them out of our production for all the reasons that Philip said, but I just think it's interesting.
It is interesting. And so has Don been involved, supportive?
Very much in the background.
Is he going to come see it?
Who knows? He's quite an elderly man now and lives in LA. So, I don't know, perhaps he will surprise us.
Or maybe we'll go to LA.
Yeah, let's go to LA.
Surprise him.
Okay, any other hands? Yes, in the front row.
A question about the design of the set and everything, because when Isherwood writes the book, he just describes everything so beautifully, and then you've got the bastard Tom Ford that then creates a film that is just beauty personified. What then influenced you when you come to create stage production? Do you follow the book? Did you follow a bit of Tom Ford, or how do you imagine? Because you can act, but then you've also then got everything that adds on stage.
We've tried very hard. We didn't have very much money, so we had to be kind of economical. And so I suppose the two main things, a way in, although it hasn't quite sort of survived to the stage, it's on the poster, is that Isherwood himself taught at a university, not Sam Thomas, because that's made up, but and it had this thing, so it's on the front there. So this is the Leo Kane Library, which is a brutalist kind of extraordinary thing, and it's sort of it's where George and Kenny are walking past. So we started with this idea, and so we started to talk about kind of brutalism and mid-century modern. The movie, he's living in this kind of Frank Lautner palace, which is quite it's beautiful, but is unlikely for an English professor. So we tried to look, and as Olivia said, again, Julianne Moore, fabulous, wearing a Watteau gown. If she's so much of a movie star, then I don't understand her. It's an exquisite performance, but I don't, in terms of what Olivia said, the Charlie in the book is a lot more kind of mucked up. So I think we.
Her house is like
Yeah.
a wooden shack
Yeah.
practically.
It's
So,
like a
you know,
prefab thing,
it's
isn't
just
it?
not-
And it's up all these stairs.
yeah.
So we talked about concrete, we talked about kind of the softening of wood and mid-century modern, and then we also started to talk about it as a kind of memory play, because there is this, in some ways, it is kind of that the entire play is the last seconds of his life. So there is, or that can be a way of looking at it, and therefore then we turned something that was like not having very much money into something which we hoped was an aesthetic, was that if George didn't have it in his eye line, then it wasn't there. So kind of, but that's why, and Simon and I had kind of long discussions about this, because I think he imagined that all props would be mimed, which would have been a hell of a lot easier and cheaper, except that then if you have an abstract set and no props, it may be kind of hard to kind of anchor. So we came up with this conceit that if George saw it or touched it, it would be real, but other than that, it wouldn't be there. And also, you know, the park is it's like a Shakespearean arena, so you foreground the people, you foreground the actors. And so sort of Caitlin and I kind of came up with this kind of kit that was something that could kind of move in various different ways and redefine the space. Then, for various reasons, well, sadly, I mean, a lot of set builders have gone bust during COVID, and a lot of wood is produced in Ukraine, so sets have got a lot bigger. So we actually had to cut half the set just before rehearsals. So it's a much simpler version. And then we discovered that this was much heavier than we thought. So originally the beach scene, there was nothing on. So kind of, and originally Phoebe was going to be on the bed, but that was just not going to work. So various things happened during rehearsals, and those sorts of sea breaks that happen, you know, in the beach, that was all kind of rehearsal and sort of necessity. So, you know, one creates a kit, one creates a language, one works with actors. Working with Theo and Olivia, I was like, we can't sit at the table for 12 pages, so we talked about kind of other places they might end up, the sort of what we call the kind of broken puppet bit and the kind of bossa nova bit and those sorts of things. And so we looked at ways of kind of reinventing the space. So that's what we did.
I have to say, I thought the most beautiful part was when you had the scene here at the table and chairs. It felt you brought it into the audience. I think that's.
But there's nowhere else you can put it. That's the Thank you.
Yes.
But there is nowhere else to put it.
Cost about 80 quid.
Yeah. Actually, that's really expensive. That table arrived during the tech, because most of the time poor old Phoebe was lugging a suitcase off. And Miles
we rehearsed with a suitcase on wheels.
Mid-century modern stuff
like
is incredibly expensive. But you know, it's kind of you said that. But genuinely, if the bar's there, that's the only place really that the thing could be. Because I love the park, and it's kind of, there are real, and that was the other thing with the thing, there was no way, that is really, really tricky in this space. So it was also about, but I just loved, you know, kind of, you know, Olivia dancing on that farm there, and Phoebe's on her phone, and Freddie's coming on, you know, it was about kind of using the space as theatrically and as adventurously as possible.
You do have to use these entrances and exits in this space, because you want it happening all around you. But I'm just going to name check set and costume designer Caitlin Abbott. Also, obviously the story is set in the 1960s. I don't think any of you were alive then? No, okay. But the time period is really important, and not just in terms of, like, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis happening in the background. We're hearing bits and snatches of news, but it seems to me, as someone who is a US-UK dual national myself and an expat, there's something so significant about where the US and the UK were in the world at that time. You know, the place in the world for these two countries. One ascending empire, one declining. And anyway, I'm fascinated by that. I'm just wondering, as a company, how much did you immerse yourself into that time period? Miles, you're going to say something?
I mean, it's been, I think, playing a teenager, like the birth of the teenager, was an interesting thing to explore. And
yes, that whole scene when you're talking about, the youth today, we don't care about the past.
And this first time where I know Kenny's like 21, but young people had money from their parents. They had extra income that they could give to their children. They had independence. They didn't want to grow up. And I think, but interestingly, I think Kenny's a bit counter all of that. I think looking at beat poetry from the late 50s and like when he talked about writing poetry and Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and all that lot, and kind of looking at maybe Kenny doesn't buy into this whole new capitalist, bigger and better, America's great kind of thing, and being a bit more subvertive, even in his relationships, being in a relationship with Anise, and but and exploring his sexuality as well. I think it's all kind of ambiguous and blurred, and I think you can't play knowledge, so I think it was more about just knowing that everything's there, letting it sit, and just seeing how it then plays when I'm opposite someone who's gone through a completely different life, or in a completely different world, and then just seeing
George,
where
that is.
yes, and then just seeing how that works really. But it's been cool.
And Phoebe, what about for you? 1960s? Did you research the period?
Yeah,
especially?
yeah.
What did you do?
I think I heard Theo mention the word Pinterest on the first day of rehearsals, and I've used my Pinterest because there's so much wonderful stuff on there. But yeah, it was a joy to explore.
And for me, music is kind of a way in. I tend to produce a playlist, and quite a lot of it's actually in the show. So, but kind of what's going on in terms of, and sort of when the audience come in, there's a bit of Tab Hunter, who's a kind of matinee idol, and also secretly a gay man. So we were kind of looking at a bit of that, and Moon River, which is Breakfast at Tiffany's, is 1961, and it was my parents' favourite song, so I put that in. And but then kind of Peggy Lee, that's 1958, that one. But sort of using that as a kind of satire on kind of Mr. and Mrs. America, and behind closed doors there were kind of same-sex couples. That's not in the play. That's it. That's not in the text. That's us. So that was my idea. But and sort of Chet Baker. There's the bit that's playing in there is called "Alone Together." Jazz fans. So there's various things, and that's 1961. And there's sort of Frank Hubbard. There's lots of things going on in jazz, and how music is kind of both kind of being very kind of perky and up, and also kind of breaking down. I thought was quite interesting.
That is interesting. Have you published a Spotify list?
No.
Ashley?
I haven't, but I'm sure Philip will.
Okay, well, that's okay. Any further hands? We're going to have to wind up, I think, in a minute. Oh,
Just
gosh, you
one
said
other question.
greedy. Greedy.
Sorry.
Go on then, go on.
I'm obsessed by Charlie.
We're all obsessed.
Aren't we? Yes, we're all obsessed,
We're going to
Olivia.
protect you. Stalker.
In the film, she's fragile. You haven't obviously watched the whole thing in the film yet. She's fragile, but she's quite a strong woman. And then I had a feeling when you were playing her here, more like in the book, she's fragile but very feminine. What do you feel when you were playing the character? Do you feel that she was a very feminine person, or do you feel that actually she's quite a strong feminist individual?
Those things aren't separate for me. So I think they all go hand in hand. But I think I did quite a lot of research on the women who were abandoned by GIs, and that's a whole world of there's still so much more to do, but it's a really interesting thing, and how they had to be tough, but they had gone there for love. And so there's already two things going on there. There's femininity, softness, love, and survival. And she's a survivor. I think they're both survivors, and I think they have that in common. I think she's very fragile around the people she can be fragile with, who accept her, and I think that's also something they have in common. But I think she gets on with it. The two phone calls that I do, one is in the morning, I think, and one is in what time are you at the supermarket? 6-ish.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason why I'm in the same clothes. I think she's having some sort of nervous breakdown, but I think there can be strength within that as well. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. And what do you think? How do you think Charlie deals with the death of her friend? And does she go to England?
Yeah.
She goes
I
back.
think so. Yeah. She's devastated.
Yeah.
Maybe she doesn't go to live with Anne. Maybe she goes back, but she goes, right, come on,
Buys a
live.
pub.
Let's live, yeah.
Turns into
Maybe she goes up to
Get out of my
Manchester and buys that producer.
Oh, backstory.
Okay, I want two final questions I want to ask. One, we talk a lot about Isherwood's language and how much of that is contained in the play that is not in the film. There's some beautiful lines. I wrote pages and pages of lines that I just love. are there particular bits of the language that has struck each of you that either you get to say or somebody else gets to say or that just stay with you? I'm going to start on this side. Ashley.
I just think the opening line that Theo has, now is I can't remember exactly Theo, now is a whole day later than yesterday, just it's this sort of poem that Isherwood writes, which is him at the beginning and at the end of the novel, and it's about him living in a constant sort of cycle of grief, and I think he writes that quite in a very poetic way, and quite a rhythmic way, which I think Theo has brought rather beautifully into the production.
Done, Theo. Phoebe, do you have a particular line that sticks out to you?
Of my own life.
Any, whether you say it or just you are struck by it in the script.
I love the lines that we say as the paramedics, mainly at the end, which are really just lifted directly from the novel, and they feel like poetry, almost like Shakespearean. I love saying them.
Lovely. Miles?
I think it's really tragic in the scene that you have in the wheelchair when Theo talks about the fair and the palm reading and stuff, and you just say, what did you say the time was? And it just kind of, you're playing someone who's been robbed of their life, and I remember the first time you did it in rehearsals, and it reduced everyone to tears. It's so sad, and it's so powerful every time you do it. And I think, I'm running around in the backstage, but I hear it, and I'm like, oh God, yeah. So it's that for me is probably.
Lovely. I'm going to leave you to the last. Theo?
I really like. So the cottages that once reeked of gin and poetry fell to the occupying army of Coca-Cola drinking television watchers. Because it's a fucker to sorry, that's so. It's a very difficult to get. It's really chewy, but it's beautiful. Yeah. It's just so beautiful that it's just a lovely piece of like.
Nice. Yeah. Olivia, you're thinking of lots of different
all of it, really. I just think it's all I think it's so beautiful, and I can't choose a favourite. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, mine would be actually. I've forgotten it. It's on. I chose it for the leaflet, which is that I have to forget in order to go on living. Those lines are. They for me that was sort of the heart of the play. That in order to move on, you have to let go, which I just think is kind of really extraordinary.
Oh, the minorities a bit is fascinating, particularly right now.
That is. For a minority to be thought of as a minority, they must be thought of as some sort of threat, real or imagined, to the majority.
Yeah, it's quite a. You have to. Yes, it's a great responsibility that speech.
Yes, it is.
And you have to sort of try and land it right.
Well, I'll just throw in a few of mine. Reading and bohemianism do not mix. And there are some things you don't even know you know until you're asked. And I'm sure there are many things I forgot to ask, so I haven't done my job. But the last question, this is something I draw on, we'll have a show of hands. Brought up in the play, do you think it's better to die quickly and unexpectedly, or to know?
Quickly and unexpectedly.
Quickly and
say that
unexpectedly.
again.
Would you rather die quickly and unexpectedly, or know that you're going to die?
I'm 22.
Do you think about that? No, hardly at all.
Well, okay.
Kenny says.
Everyone's saying quickly and unexpectedly. Really?
I mean, for sure.
For sure.
I want to be able to say goodbye to people.
Exactly, young man.
Yeah.
That's exactly. You want to be able to
They
say goodbye
don't want to
and
have
also
to say goodbye to us.
Oh.
Philip's not sure.
No, Philip is sure.
What do you think?
Well, I've experienced both, so neither are much fun. So, I think it is nice to be able to say goodbye. I've not been able to say goodbye a number of times. So.
Yes, that's hard. And Ashley, do you have a view?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously better for the person to die quickly, but for the people around them, it's not so good. So it depends how selfish you are.
I don't think it is good to die. Well, as a
think
person who...
Yes, but if you're in a lot of pain, obviously. It's
If
not
you're in a
good
lot
to
of
die.
pain.
Do you know what I mean? So it's a tricky
But it's
debate.
nice as the person to be able to say goodbye and
Yes.
have that time with people
Right,
and
yes.
cherish that time.
Yes, I suppose that's true as well from that perspective. Yeah,
And-
absolutely. Okay, I'll go in that camp. Yeah.
So ending on a happy note.
Let's put Peggy Lee back on.
Sorry. Okay, all right. Now, audience, thank you. You've been wonderful. You are now officially part of our champions of the production and Troupe Theatre. So will you please go forth and book tickets to come and see it again? Tell your friends. It's here until the 26th. Is everyone nodding and saying yes?
Yes.
And then when we do, if for those on social media, once we give a big clap, we're going to do what I call the social media money shot. So all of you get your phones out and we'll all club together and you'll get something that you can share on social. And then, what have I forgotten? 26th of November, what else? Playtext?
Playtext
Play-
program plays until the 26th of November.
Oh, and
So,
please
yeah.
keep an eye out on what Troupe is doing next.
Yes.
What is Troupe doing
I
next?
don't know yet.
Recovering.
Because their productions are always of the very highest quality. So please join me in thanking Ashley and Phoebe and Miles and Philip and Theo and Olivia and you.